a typical playdate, a troubled young teen, and one deadly secret. All of these elements are tied up together in a case that to this day is often regarded as one of the most disturbing and shocking. What is up, Iwu crew? Today we are exploring the infamous case of Alyssa Bustamante. Let's get into it. From the moment Alyssa Bustamante was born to her teenage parents in January of 1994, she was introduced to a world of endless trials and tribulations. Her mother, Michelle, who was only 15 when she had Alyssa, was reported to struggle with raising her daughter and was described by news sources as a less-than-picture-perfect mom. Later court documents reported that Michelle had a history of misdemeanor convictions for drunken driving and marijuana possession. Alyssa's father, Cesar, was also alleged to have addiction issues, and police records show that he was eventually convicted of felony assault and was sentenced to serve 3 concurrent terms in prison. While Alyssa was still very young, the family moved frequently between California and Missouri. As a child, Alyssa, with 2 teenage parents who didn't appear to be ready to raise a child, had already begun developing questionable behavior. However, this behavior would only increasingly worsen after she and her younger brothers were taken in by their grandparents when Alyssa was around 8 years old. In fact, her grandparents eventually achieved legal custody of the 4 children. The grandparents wanted to raise the children with more stability and brought them to the small, quaint town of St. Martin's, Missouri, which had a population of just over 1,000 at the time. In the little town, crammed right next to Jefferson City, everyone knew just about everyone. Alyssa did not adjust right away, though. In fact, it was difficult for Alyssa to get used to living with her grandparents, and she allegedly struggled with depression and was reported to occasionally self-harm. As Alyssa grew into a teenager and attended Jefferson City High School, she began to develop a more edgy personality. She often had strands of hair in front of her eyes due to her side-swept bangs, wore heavy eye makeup, and painted her nails black. This was in contrast to the other young girls she interacted with, especially at the church she regularly attended, where she was known to participate in several different youth activities. Although most people just saw a girl with an edgy style, Alyssa was far from a typical teenager, as deep inside she was stirring with distress and turmoil. This dark, troubled side of the young teen would show itself in disturbing and often upsetting ways at home. Online sources cite that Alyssa's mood would often fluctuate, and she developed a habit of taking rather questionable pictures of herself. This included selfies where her lipstick was smeared to look like blood, and another where her fingers imitated a gun to her head. This side of Alyssa only seemed to grow as time went on, and things continually worsened down the line, eventually culminating to a peak on one fateful Labor Day weekend in 2007. Alyssa was rushed to the hospital after carving the word hate on her arm and attempting to take her own life by overdosing on Tylenol. After the scare, her grandparents knew they had to find help for Alyssa before things got even worse. Alyssa's grandparents tried endlessly to find her aid, taking her to numerous counselors and therapists. Soon after the incident, Alyssa was prescribed Prozac, an antidepressant. Despite their best efforts, Alyssa continued down a dark path, one that would eventually lead to a terrible incident. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Olten, Alyssa's 9-year-old neighbor, was seen as the complete opposite. She was described by her mother as a sweet, girly girl, loving kittens and everything pink. On October 21, 2009, Elizabeth Olten was at home practicing for a school play. Her mother, Patricia Price, otherwise known as Patty, was just preparing for dinner when there was a knock at the door. It was one of Elizabeth's friends, 6-year-old Emma, who lived across the woods. She had walked over to see if Elizabeth could come play with her. Elizabeth, as any child would, begged to go and play for just a few minutes. Reluctantly, Patty allowed her, but instructed that she had to be back in an hour at 6 o'clock sharp. Because of Elizabeth's fear of the dark, Patty was quite confident that her daughter would be back shortly. Excitedly, the two friends burst out the door and into the fresh air. Little did Patty know, an innocent playdate would soon turn into a nightmare. When it finally reached 6 o'clock, Elizabeth still hadn't returned, and Patty had a terrible premonition. Immediately, Patty called her neighbor, hoping to hear that Elizabeth was still playing with Emma. Unfortunately, that was not the case. In fact, Patty was horrified to hear from her neighbors that Elizabeth had never made it to the house at all. After calling the police, Patty went over to the neighbor's house to be sure that Elizabeth wasn't somewhere on the property. To her dismay, Elizabeth was nowhere to be found. Police began a grid search, and hundreds of people in the community joined to try and find the missing Elizabeth. During the search, investigators pinged Elizabeth's cell phone, which said it was located somewhere in the forest, and they directed their search to that area. A few volunteers had come across something a bit peculiar in the woods, what appeared to be an empty grave, but still, there was no sign of the young girl. The FBI quickly became involved, and they soon questioned Emma. According to trial documents, she told investigators that she had played for a while, and then Elizabeth had headed back home. However, Emma, shortly after playing with Elizabeth, had fallen into a bush full of thorns and started crying before she called out, "Alyssa, come and help me." As it turned out, Alyssa Bustamante was Emma's half-sister, and Alyssa was in the area when the two young girls were playing. Alyssa, who was only 15 at the time, was questioned to see if she knew anything of importance about Elizabeth's disappearance. Alyssa lamented that she had no idea where the missing girl was. Police observed that Alyssa was calm and cooperative, and decided that at the time there was no reason to suspect her. However, this would soon take a dramatic turn. Eventually, investigators brought her over to the area of the empty grave. There, Sergeant Rice and his forensics team were processing the area, and as Alyssa made her way over, Rice heard her say something rather strange. Alyssa said that she herself had dug the hole, but assured them that there was nothing sinister behind it. Instead, when Rice asked her why, she responded that she just liked to dig holes and that she would place dead animals in them on occasion. Although Alyssa made it sound like the grave was nothing to worry about, Sergeant Rice found her explanation suspicious. While FBI agents searched the Bustamante home for any sign of clues, one agent in particular investigated Alyssa's room. What was found by the officer was more than disturbing. It was crucial evidence. Compared to the rest of the home, Alyssa's room was dark and dreary, with writing on the walls. Although some of the notes on her walls were written in pen, others were described by police as appearing to have been written in blood. Along with the strange writing and postcards sent from her father from prison, investigators uncovered an unnerving drawing. Upon further inspection, it turned out to be a drawing of Alyssa's half-sister Emma, as titled on the paper. However, in a disturbing twist, Emma was drawn with slashes on her head and arm. As police continued through the room of horrors, they still hadn't found anything that could relate to Elizabeth's disappearance. That is, until they found a diary written by Alyssa. The diary, while not innocent in the slightest, still had nothing of substance in relation to Elizabeth at first. Police flipped through the pages, discovering where Alyssa had previously written about burning down a house and killing its occupants. Police assumed that she was referring to her grandparents' house. The investigators turned to a page bearing the date of October 21st, 2009, the day Elizabeth vanished. The entry was oddly scribbled out in blue ink, and the only thing they could properly make out at the time was the very last sentence, which read, "I gotta go to church now, LOL." The agents took the diary as potential evidence, with the intent to try and make out the rest of the entry later. When they eventually used black lighting to read what was scribbled under the blue ink, they had a glimpse of something incredibly disturbing. The two words "slit" and "throat." It was also soon discovered that the same day as Elizabeth's disappearance, Alyssa had taken a day off from school, her first unexcused absence, which further increased the suspicion surrounding the 15-year-old. Alyssa was brought in to speak with police about what they had uncovered. Sergeant Rice took her diary into the interrogation room with Alyssa and her grandmother, but he did not yet reveal to the 15-year-old that he had it. A few questions later, Sergeant Rice informed her that he was in possession of her diary and told her that they had read the last entry. At first, Alyssa tried to say that she had indeed gone into the forest with Elizabeth, but she had not killed her. Instead, she claimed that Elizabeth hit her head and died immediately. Up until this point, investigators had been holding out hope that the young girl could possibly be found alive. Rice didn't buy Alyssa's story for a second. After clarifying that the real cause of death would be revealed in the autopsy, he asked her firmly, was her throat cut? To which Alyssa replied, yes. Alyssa's grandmother immediately started to cry after this shocking revelation, and soon left the interrogation room. Alyssa then admitted in detail the horrific acts she committed on that tragic day. Alyssa had instructed her young half-sister Emma to go and fetch Elizabeth and ask her to play. Of course, Alyssa's intent was far from simply letting the two girls enjoy a playdate. Her sinister plot unraveled from there, as she told Emma to go home after she had brought Elizabeth to her. It was then that she led her into the forest. In the police report, Rice quoted Alyssa as saying to 9-year-old Elizabeth, "I've got something really neat to show you. It's just a little further up here." Then, Alyssa lured Elizabeth to where she had already dug a grave deep in the woods. When they arrived, Alyssa began to strangle Elizabeth. It didn't end there, though. Alyssa then stabbed her in the chest multiple times and slit her throat. She proceeded to bury her in one of the two graves she had dug and went back home as if nothing had ever happened. Alyssa, who was but a child herself, had violently ended another child's life in the most brutal way possible. After Alyssa's horrific confession, she then led investigators to Elizabeth's body, tucked away in the woods. Elizabeth, covered in mud and leaves, was found partially buried mere inches under the ground. A sad and gruesome sight. After the autopsy, it was revealed that Elizabeth was killed in the exact way that Alyssa had described to Rice, with 8 stab wounds to the chest. Eventually, investigators were able to use the blue light to uncover the rest of Alyssa's sick entry. It read, "I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat, and now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky right now, though. Okay, I gotta go to church now, LOL." While the entry itself is disturbing enough, as the investigation continued, more unbelievable details were uncovered. Police found evidence that Alyssa had told a friend that she wondered what it would be like to kill someone. On Alyssa's YouTube, she had listed her hobbies, including killing people. As well, a diary entry written a week prior to Elizabeth's death read, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's gonna die." When police asked why she had killed Elizabeth, Alyssa chillingly explained that she just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Some theories speculate that Elizabeth had not been her original target. Instead, it's widely believed that she initially wanted to kill her two brothers, which would explain why she had dug the two graves. Hauntingly, following digging the graves, she had gone to school and lived her life as usual, though she appeared to be making plans to kill someone. A disturbing video Alyssa uploaded onto her YouTube page is often pointed to as evidence for the speculated theory that she had initially targeted her brothers. In the video, she convinces her brothers to touch an electric cattle fence. Before it shows her brothers touching the fence, a text title appears saying, "This is where it gets good. We get to see my brothers get hurt." On January 30th, 2012, Alyssa's trial began. She was tried as an adult and pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. However, Alyssa's confession was then suppressed, and her defense team was offered a plea deal, which they accepted. Alyssa was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the chance of parole. She also had had an additional 30 years added because of the armed criminal action charge. This meant that Alyssa would serve a little over 35 years in prison before being eligible for parole. Needless to say, this upset Elizabeth's family as well as much of the public. Elizabeth's father, who was in prison on a state drug conviction at the time of the murder, had pleaded in a letter sent to court for Alyssa to receive the maximum sentence before she had been convicted. To Elizabeth's father, it didn't seem fair that while Elizabeth had no chance to live her life, Alyssa could possibly have the chance to live hers after serving time in prison. Alyssa made a statement during her sentencing while the Olten family sat stony-faced nearby. She said, "I cannot even understand what you guys are going through. I'm sorry for that. If I could give my life to bring her back, I would, and I'm sorry." Understandably, the Olten family was not even close to accepting the teenage murderess's apology. Since the trial, Elizabeth's mother, Patty, has settled a wrongful death lawsuit against Alyssa, which requires her to pay her more than $5 million. In 2021, Alyssa Bustamante has quite a few persistent supporters, mostly online. On chat forums, some people have commented that they love her, while others say that they would love to be friends with her. Many of these supporters believe that Alyssa, who is now around the age of 27, still might have a chance to turn her life around, and some even think she should be released from prison. There is an interesting and popular theory surrounding Alyssa and her use of antidepressants as a potential factor in her crime. In fact, this theory came up during her trial. At the time of Elizabeth's death, Alyssa was taking Prozac, and her dosage had increased a considerable amount only a few weeks before she committed the crime. Antidepressants are known to have some awful side effects, but Prozac is supposedly on a completely different level. According to LiveScience.com, Prozac is most commonly linked to aggression and known to increase violent behavior by 10.9 times. This fact has led some to speculate that the antidepressant could possibly have played a role in Alyssa's behavior. According to The Guardian, young people taking antidepressants such as Prozac or Seroxat are significantly more likely to commit violent crimes when on the medication. which supports this theory. However, it continues, but taking higher doses of the drugs appear to reduce that risk, scientists say. This additional information appears to discredit the theory, since her dosage had in fact increased. And yet, The Guardian also cites that in a study looking at correlations between crime rates and people who are prescribed drugs like Prozac and Seroxat, it found that people in younger age groups, ages 15 to 24, have a much higher chance of committing violent crimes while on the medication, a hefty 43%. Despite these statistics, Dr. Anthony Rothschild, the main prosecution witness in Alyssa's trial on the second day of the sentencing hearing, denies this theory adamantly by saying, "There is no reliable evidence in the medical and scientific literature that Prozac causes people to commit murder." Although these theories are interesting to consider, the fact still stands that either way, Elizabeth Olten's murder was committed by Alyssa Bustamante. No matter the opinions over alleged reasons behind the murder, Elizabeth's family must still bear the burden of knowing that they will never see the happy little girl again, because of Alyssa's dark choices. Sweet Elizabeth, who only wanted to go and play outside before dinner, didn't even have the chance to make it back home. Patty has commented that she hates Alyssa and has also tearfully stated, "So much has been lost at the hands of that monster. Elizabeth was given a death sentence, and we were given a life sentence."